At 4:47 on the morning of May 11, 1945, Private John McKinney lay inside his tent near Dingolan Bay on Luzon. He did not know that nearly 100 Japanese soldiers were moving through the jungle toward his position. He was 24 years old and had spent 2.5 years in the army. He was the son of a sharecropper from Georgia and had only a third-grade education. By May 1945, the campaign in the Philippines had already cost the United States more than 60,000 casualties. Japanese forces on Luzon refused to surrender. They carried out night attacks and early morning raids and suicide charges against American defensive lines. Company A of the 123rd Infantry Regiment of the 33rd Infantry Division had set up an outpost near Dingolan Bay in Tayabas Province. The site protected a vital supply route. 3 American soldiers operated a light machine gun on the perimeter. McKinney had just completed a long shift at that position. He walked a short distance to his tent and lay down with his M1 rifle beside him. The jungle was silent. The Japanese knew the outpost was there. They had watched it for days. They counted the soldiers. They tracked guard changes. They planned their attack carefully. The assault force moved forward in the dark. It included more than 100 soldiers from broken Japanese units still fighting on Luzon. They carried rifles, grenades, knee mortars and swords. Their goal was clear. They intended to overrun the American position. They planned to kill everyone. They aimed to seize the supplies. The lead element slipped past the outer guard without being seen. Sergeant Fukutaro Mori led the advance group. His orders were to kill the first Americans quietly. There was to be no gunfire. Only swords and bayonets were to be used. By the time the main force struck, the defenses would already be breached. Mori reached McKinney's tent. He could hear the American breathing inside. One fast blow would end the man's life before any warning could be raised. McKinney had grown up hunting in the woods of Georgia. His father worked as a sharecropper in Scranton County. The family owned nothing. John learned to shoot before he learned to read. By the age of 12 he could hit a squirrel at 50 yards with a small rifle. He trapped rabbits and hunted deer. Fishing and hunting kept the family fed when crops failed. He enlisted at Fort McPherson in November 1942. The Army soon learned that he could barely read or write. They also learned that he was one of the finest marksmen they had ever tested. His qualification scores stood out. Drill sergeants noticed that he moved through the woods unlike most soldiers. He was quieter and more alert. His life had trained him to survive in places where one mistake meant hunger. The 33rd Infantry Division deployed to the Pacific in 1943. McKinney fought in New Guinea. He endured the jungle. He survived Japanese attacks. He lived through malaria and dysentery and the many hardships of the Pacific War. By May 1945 he was a seasoned soldier. He was calm and reserved. He carried out his duties without complaint. His fellow soldiers knew 2 things about him. He was the best shot in the company. He always slept with his rifle. That habit was about to save his life. If you want to know how McKinney survived what followed, please press the like button. It helps share these forgotten stories with more people. Please subscribe if you have not already. Now back to McKinney. At 4:51 Mori threw open the tent flap. His sword came down in a diagonal strike aimed at McKinney's neck. In the darkness Mori misjudged the distance. The blade struck the side of McKinney's head instead. It cut away part of his right ear. Blood splashed across the tent canvas. McKinney's eyes opened to intense pain and the outline of a man standing over him with a raised sword. He had less than 1 second to respond. Mori was already lifting the sword for a second blow. This strike would be fatal. McKinney's hand found his rifle in the dark. He did not aim. He did not pause. Years of instinct took control. He swung the M1 as a club. The rifle but hit Mori under the chin with enough force to break bone. The Japanese sergeant stumbled. McKinney swung again. The second blow crushed Maury's skull. Outside the tent McKinney could hear movement. Footsteps. Many footsteps moving quickly through the camp. The main assault was now underway. He was bleeding heavily from his ear. His head was ringing after the sword strike. Somewhere in the darkness nearly 100 Japanese soldiers were advancing to kill everyone he knew. McKinney seized his rifle and stepped outside the tent. What he saw stopped him cold. The machine gun position stood 30 yards from his tent. 3 Americans had been operating it when he went to rest. Now there were muzzle flashes in the dark along with shouting and the sharp crack of Arisaka rifles mixing with the heavier sound of M1 Garands. Japanese soldiers were breaking through the perimeter from the northeast. They advanced in waves. The first group had already reached the machine gun emplacement. McKinney could make out figures struggling in the darkness around the gun pit. His mind assessed the situation within seconds. The machine gun was the core of the entire defense. It controlled the main approach to the camp. If the Japanese captured it and turned it around, they could sweep the perimeter with fire. Every American in Company A would be killed. McKinney ran straight toward the gun. The 2 soldiers who had replaced him there were fighting to survive. Private James Hendricks had been struck by a bayonet in the shoulder during the opening moments of the attack. The third man saw him fall and made a quick decision. He lifted his wounded comrade and pulled him toward the rear of the perimeter. It was the correct choice. Hendricks would have died from blood loss if left there. But the move left the machine gun without protection. 10 Japanese infantrymen reached the emplacement before McKinney arrived. They climbed over the sandbag wall. One immediately tried to turn the gun around. The others formed security with rifles aimed outward, watching for an American response. McKinney did not slow his pace. He did not look for cover. He did not wait for support. He ran directly at 10 enemy soldiers who had just seized the most important weapon in the outpost. The Japanese noticed him. A single American wounded in the head was charging toward them in the early morning darkness. 2 of them raised their rifles. McKinney reacted first. He fired at the first man at 15 yards. The sound of the M1 echoed through the camp. He fired again at 10 yards. By the time he reached the sandbag wall, he had fired 4 shots. 4 Japanese soldiers were down. He jumped into the gun emplacement. The space inside measured about 8 feet by 6 feet. 6 enemy soldiers were still alive in that tight area. Some were trying to turn their rifles. Others were reaching for bayonets. One was still struggling with the machine gun traverse. McKinney landed among them and continued firing at very close range. The M1 Garand carried 8 rounds in its internal magazine. He had already fired 4. He sent the next 3 rounds into 3 more Japanese soldiers at distances measured in inches rather than yards. 1 round remained. The 8th soldier stood directly in front of him with a bayonet raised for a thrust at McKinney's chest. McKinney fired his final round and the soldier fell. The rifle bolt locked back on an empty magazine with its clear metallic sound. 3 Japanese soldiers were still alive in the pit. They heard the sound and knew what it meant. McKinney reversed his grip on the rifle before the empty clip had fully ejected. He swung the weapon like an axe. The wooden stock struck the first soldier at the temple and he collapsed. McKinney swung again. The second soldier tried to block with his arm. The rifle but broke bone and continued into his skull. The third soldier lunged forward with a bayonet. McKinney stepped aside and brought the rifle down on the back of his neck. The spine cracked loudly. 10 Japanese soldiers had taken the machine gun. 30 seconds later all 10 were dead. McKinney reached for the machine gun and placed his hands on the receiver. Something was wrong. During the fight the weapon had been damaged. The bolt was jammed and the feed tray was bent. He pulled the charging handle twice but nothing happened. The gun would not fire. The most important weapon on the perimeter was now useless. McKinney looked up from the damaged machine gun. Dawn was beginning to brighten the eastern horizon, and in the gray light he saw them. More Japanese soldiers. Many more. They were regrouping at the edge of the jungle and preparing for another attack. He held an M1 rifle with an empty magazine. He had just killed 10 men in close combat. His ear was still bleeding and the main assault had not fully begun. McKinney reached down and pulled a bandolier of ammunition from one of the dead Japanese soldiers. The rounds were American .30 caliber. The man had likely taken them in an earlier fight. McKinney loaded a fresh clip into his rifle. Somewhere in the darkness a Japanese officer was shouting orders. McKinney could not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. They were coming again. He settled into the gun pit among the bodies around him and rested his rifle on the sandbag wall. He waited. The second wave came out of the jungle 60 yards away. McKinney counted at least 20 soldiers in the first line with more behind them. They ran forward with rifles and fixed bayonets and shouted as they charged. McKinney placed his front sight on the lead soldier and pulled the trigger. The M1 Garand was built for fast semi-automatic fire. A trained soldier could fire 8 aimed shots in under 10 seconds. McKinney was not trained in that way. He was a hunter from Georgia who had been shooting since childhood. He was faster. The first Japanese soldier fell at 60 yards. McKinney shifted his aim. The second dropped, then the third. The rifle pushed back against his shoulder with each shot. Empty cases flew to his right. He did not think about his actions. His body remembered countless hours in the woods. Lead the target. Pull the trigger. Find the next target. Do it again. The clip ejected with a sharp sound. McKinney slammed in another from the bandolier. The charging soldiers had closed 20 yards during the reload. Now they were 40 yards away. He began firing again. The attackers had expected to find a captured machine gun position. They believed their comrades would be using it against the American camp. Instead they faced one man with a rifle cutting them down with steady accuracy. 8 shots. Reload. 8 shots. Reload. Some reached within 15 yards of the pit before McKinney dropped them. Others tried to move left or right to find cover. He followed their movement and fired. A moving target was easier to hit than a still one. McKinney had learned that while hunting deer. The second wave collapsed. The survivors fled back toward the jungle. McKinney counted the bodies in front of his position. 11 more. 21 since the attack began. There was no time for relief. Japanese officers were already regrouping their men. He could hear them shouting beyond the trees. Then he heard something else. A hollow thump coming from deep in the jungle. Then more knee mortars fired. The first round exploded 10 yards to his left. Dirt and metal fragments sprayed across the gun pit. McKinney pressed himself flat against the sandbags. The second round landed closer. The third struck the parapet itself and covered him with debris. The Japanese had learned from the first 2 waves. They would not rush into his rifle fire again. They chose to weaken the position with mortars first. Their plan was to kill him or force him to stay down and then send in the infantry. McKinney understood the situation at once. If he stayed in the gun pit, the mortars would eventually hit him. The gunners were adjusting their fire with each shot and closing in. But if he left, he would give up the only strong position on this part of the perimeter. A grenade landed 3 feet away. McKinney grabbed it and threw it back over the sandbags. It exploded in the air. The blast knocked him sideways. His ears rang constantly. Blood from his damaged ear soaked through the rough bandage he held to the wound. Another mortar round hit the sandbags directly. The wall partly collapsed. McKinney was now half exposed to the jungle. He made his choice. Staying meant death. He took 2 bandoliers of ammunition from the bodies around him. He threw them over his shoulder and ran. The Japanese saw him move. Rifle shots cracked from the trees. Bullets snapped past his head. McKinney ran 15 yards to a shallow dip in the ground. It was not a real foxhole, only a low spot in the terrain. He threw himself into it and rolled onto his back. Rounds struck the dirt inches from his face. He crawled to the edge of the dip and found a firing position. The Japanese infantry began moving again. They believed he was fleeing. They believed he was retreating. 2 squads came out of the jungle at a quick walk with rifles ready. They moved toward the empty gun pit. McKinney waited until they reached 30 yards. Then he fired. The attackers had grouped together while crossing the open ground. That was a mistake. McKinney's first shot dropped the lead soldier. The second hit the man behind him. The group scattered, but there was no cover between the jungle and McKinney's new position. He shot them as they ran. 8 rounds fired. Reload. The survivors reached the gun pit and found only bodies. Their men from the first wave lay there. They expected to find the American at the gun. Instead, they were being fired on from a new direction. 3 more fell before they located his firing point. McKinney changed position again. He moved 10 yards to his right while they tried to reorganize. He found another low spot and fired again. He was doing what he had learned in the Georgia woods. Never stay in one place. Never allow the target to predict the next shot. A deer that hears one shot will freeze. A deer that hears shots from different places will panic. The Japanese were panicking. Daylight spread across the sky. McKinney had been fighting for 18 minutes. His ammunition was running low. His ear continued to bleed. He could see movement in the jungle that showed the enemy was gathering for another large attack. He needed more ammunition and he knew where it was. The dead Japanese soldiers near the gun pit carried supplies. Not only American .30 caliber rounds. Some carried Arisaka rifles with full pouches. Others had grenades on their belts. McKinney needed to return there. He waited for a pause in the mortar fire. He counted to 3 and ran across the open ground toward the gun pit. Rifle fire burst from the trees. McKinney ran in a zigzag pattern. A bullet pulled at his sleeve. Another passed close to his ear. He dove the final 5 feet and landed among the bodies he had left there 20 minutes earlier. The smell struck him at once. Blood and burned powder and the sharp scent of death. McKinney ignored it. He had slaughtered hogs on the farm. He had dressed deer in the Georgia heat. The smell was familiar. He moved fast among the bodies. He grabbed every bandolier he could reach and every loose clip. He found 4 American ammunition pouches on soldiers who had likely taken them earlier. That gave him 64 more rounds. He pushed the clips into his pockets and belt. A Japanese soldier suddenly appeared over the sandbag wall. The man had likely crawled forward while McKinney gathered ammunition. His rifle was already rising. McKinney fired and hit him in the chest at 2 feet. He took the dead soldier grenades. 3 of them. Japanese Type 97 fragmentation grenades. He had never used one before, but he had seen them and understood how they worked. Pull the pin, strike the cap against a hard surface, count to 4, then throw. He noticed movement at the edge of his vision. More soldiers were coming from the left. McKinney armed a grenade, counted and threw it over the sandbags. The blast was followed by screams. He armed the second grenade and threw it toward the tree line where muzzle flashes were most visible. More screams followed. He left the gun pit before the third grenade left his hand. He was moving again toward a new position. Keep moving. The sky was now bright enough to see clearly. McKinney spotted a shell crater 15 yards from his last position and dropped into it. The crater was 3 feet deep, which gave him cover from direct fire. From there he could see the entire route from the jungle to the perimeter. Bodies covered the ground between his position and the trees. He counted quickly. 28, maybe 30. Some were still moving. Wounded soldiers were trying to crawl back toward their lines. McKinney allowed them to go. A wounded man required 2 healthy soldiers to carry him. Each casualty increased the burden on the enemy. The mortar fire had stopped. McKinney understood the reason. The Japanese had lost sight of him. Without visual contact the mortar crews could not adjust their fire. He had 15, maybe 20 minutes before observers were moved again. He used that time to reload every empty clip he carried. His hands worked without thought. Press the rounds into the clip. Feel the spring tension. 8 rounds per clip. He had gathered enough ammunition for about 10 reloads. 80 rounds. 80 rounds against however many Japanese soldiers remained in the jungle. The attack had lasted 23 minutes. McKinney had killed or wounded at least 30 enemy soldiers, but he knew the numbers were against him. The Japanese had started with around 100 men. Even if half were down, that still left 50 and he was alone. Where was the rest of Company A? The answer was complex. The Japanese assault had struck several points along the perimeter at the same time. McKinney's position was on the northeast flank. Other soldiers were fighting on the south and west sides of the camp. The company commander was trying to organize a defense. In the darkness and confusion of a night attack, coordination was nearly impossible. McKinney did not know any of this, that he knew only that no one had come to support him. No reinforcements and no covering fire. Only him, his rifle, and the growing number of bodies ahead of his position. The Japanese regrouped at the edge of the jungle. McKinney could see them through the trees. Soldiers checked weapons. Non-commissioned officers moved through the ranks. Officers studied the American perimeter with binoculars. They had expected to overrun the outpost in 5 minutes. Instead, they had lost nearly a third of their force to one man in 23 minutes and still had not broken through. One officer lowered his binoculars. McKinney saw him point toward a specific area of the perimeter. Not the gun pit and not the craters where McKinney had been fighting. He was pointing toward the supply tents. It was a new approach meant to bypass the area McKinney had turned into a killing ground. McKinney understood the plan immediately. They intended to move around his flank and strike the camp from a direction he could not cover. From his current position there was no way to stop them. He had a decision to make. Stay in the crater where he had cover and clear lines of fire, or move to intercept an attack he might not reach in time. McKinney climbed out of the crater and ran toward the supply tents. The tents were 40 yards away. He crossed the distance in 8 seconds. He dropped behind a stack of ammunition crates just as the first Japanese soldiers came out of the jungle on the southern approach. They did not expect him to be there. The lead group had 12 soldiers moving in a column. They were heading toward the gap between 2 tents. Once through that opening they would be inside the American perimeter with clear shots at soldiers fighting elsewhere. McKinney opened fire from behind the crates. The first 3 soldiers fell before the others could react. The 4th and 5th tried to fire back but could not find him in the shadows between the tents. McKinney shot both of them. The remaining 7 scattered. Some ran back toward the jungle. Others dropped behind logs and shallow dips in the ground. McKinney focused on those who took cover. They were trapped. They could not move forward and could not retreat without exposing themselves. He then shifted his aim to the tree line. More soldiers were coming out. The Japanese commander had committed his reserve force to the flanking move. 20 more, maybe 25. They saw their pinned comrades and hesitated at the edge of the jungle. That pause was costly. McKinney fired into the clustered soldiers. 8 rounds. Reload. 8 rounds. Bodies fell among the trees. The survivors fell back into deeper cover. 26 minutes into the attack, McKinney had killed or wounded at least 35 enemy soldiers. The Japanese had attempted 3 methods: a direct assault on the machine gun, mortar fire followed by infantry movement, a flanking move toward the supply area. All 3 attempts had failed. The Japanese commander now faced a situation he had never dealt with before. His intelligence report said the outpost was held by a small American force with few heavy weapons. Standard doctrine relied on fast night attacks using speed and numbers to overcome defense. That approach had always worked. But this time one element had disrupted everything. The commander did not realize it was a single man. His soldiers reported heavy fire from several locations. They described muzzle flashes from the gun pit. Then from a low depression 30 yards away. Then from behind the supply crates. It appeared that the Americans had set up overlapping rifle positions supporting one another. This conclusion was wrong, but it guided Japanese decisions during the next phase of the fight. The mortar teams shifted their positions to the southwest. They began firing into the supply area. McKinney heard the first explosions and moved at once. He understood that fixed positions drew mortar fire. Movement increased his chance to live. He ran north along the inside of the perimeter and found a foxhole that had been abandoned when its occupant moved south to reinforce another sector. He dropped into it. This hole was deeper than his earlier positions. It was 4 feet deep and had a firing step that allowed him to see over the edge. The Japanese infantry attacked again. This time they came from 2 directions at the same moment. One group advanced from the south. Another moved from the original northeast route. Their goal was to divide his attention and force him to choose one threat. McKinney engaged both. He fired 4 shots at the southern group and dropped 2 soldiers. He swung his rifle northeast and fired 4 more rounds, dropping 2 additional men. The rifle clicked empty. He reloaded in less than 3 seconds and fired again at the southern attackers. The assault stalled. Neither group could push forward under the steady rifle fire. Neither group withdrew. They dropped to the ground and began returning fire. Bullets snapped over McKinney's head. Rounds struck the dirt around the foxhole. He was now under fire from 2 sides. His ammunition supply was shrinking. The Japanese were also learning. They realized the fire came from a single point. Not a squad and not multiple positions. One man who moved fast and shot with accuracy. This realization changed their tactics. The Japanese stopped attacking in waves. They began advancing 1 soldier at a time. One man moved while others fired to cover him. Then another moved. They advanced step by step, closing the distance. This method was meant to overwhelm a lone defender. Even a skilled shooter could not track several targets moving at different moments from different angles. Eventually someone would reach him. McKinney understood the pattern. He had seen similar behavior while hunting. Coyotes spread out and approached from several sides. The prey could only watch one threat while the others closed in. He was now the prey. 31 minutes had passed. The Japanese were within 20 yards on the southern side and 15 yards on the northeast. McKinney had fewer than 30 rounds left. The foxhole that had protected him was about to become a trap. McKinney did not wait. He sprang out of the foxhole and charged straight at the nearest group of Japanese soldiers. 5 men were crouched behind a fallen palm tree 15 yards to the northeast. They were waiting for their comrades to close in from the other side. They did not expect their target to attack. McKinney shot the first soldier while running. He shot the second as he reached the log. The third soldier stood and thrust forward with a bayonet. McKinney stepped aside and smashed his rifle butt into the man's face. Bone broke and the soldier fell. The fourth man swung his rifle as a weapon. McKinney ducked and drove the steel butt plate of his M1 into the soldier's throat. The fifth man tried to flee. McKinney shot him in the back at 3 yards. He kept moving. He could not stop. Stopping meant death. The southern group saw him leave the foxhole and rushed forward. McKinney turned and fired. 2 men fell. The others continued. He fired again and another soldier dropped. The rifle clicked empty. 3 Japanese soldiers reached him before he could reload. The first grabbed him around the waist and drove him to the ground. His rifle flew from his hands. The second soldier stamped on his injured ear. Pain tore through his head. The third raised a bayonet to strike. McKinney reached out, grabbed the ankle of the man standing on his head and twisted. The soldier lost his balance and fell. McKinney rolled and threw off the man who had tackled him. The bayonet strike missed his chest by inches and drove into the dirt. He pulled himself to his knees, found his rifle and swung it in a wide motion that struck one soldier across the temple. The man dropped at once. McKinney reversed the motion and drove the butt plate into another soldier's ribs. He felt bone give under the blow. The third soldier pulled his bayonet free from the ground and lunged. McKinney blocked the strike with the rifle barrel. The blade slid along the wood and steel and cut a deep mark into the stock. McKinney stepped inside the reach and drove his head forward into the man's face. The soldier staggered. McKinney struck him twice more with the rifle, but until he stopped moving. 33 minutes had passed since the attack began. McKinney was breathing heavily. His hands were slick with blood. Some of it belonged to him. His ear was torn and caked with dried blood. His uniform was ripped in many places. He carried bruises and cuts he could not recall receiving. But he was alive. He looked across the battlefield. Bodies lay everywhere. Japanese soldiers who had come to kill Americans had met something they did not expect. There were more bodies than he could count in the gray light of morning. He noticed movement to his right. 2 more soldiers were coming out of the jungle. McKinney raised his rifle and realized it was empty. He had not reloaded after the close fighting. The 2 soldiers saw him standing among the bodies of their comrades and hesitated. McKinney ran at them. He covered 10 yards before they could react. The first tried to lift his rifle but was too slow. McKinney rifled but struck him under the chin. The second turned to flee. McKinney caught him in 3 strides and struck him from behind. 34 minutes. McKinney thought of the mortar position. He remembered seeing flashes from the southwest. The knee mortars had been firing throughout the fight. If he removed those crews, the indirect fire threat would end. He found a loaded rifle among the dead. An M1 with a full clip. He picked it up, dropped his damaged rifle and moved toward the mortar team. The mortar crews saw him coming. 2 men. They had been adjusting their weapon for another mission. Now they rushed to defend themselves. One reached for a rifle. The other tried to arm a grenade. McKinney shot them both from 45 yards. 35 minutes. He stood in the morning light and scanned the jungle. His chest rose and fell sharply. His vision blurred from exhaustion and blood loss. Every muscle demanded rest. The jungle was silent. No more soldiers came from the trees. No more mortar rounds fell. No more rifle fire came from hidden positions. Only the sounds of wounded men and the flies already gathering over the dead. McKinney walked back toward the American perimeter. He was halfway there when he saw figures moving toward him. They wore American uniforms. Soldiers from Company A had finally reached his section of the line. They stopped when they saw him covered in blood, carrying a rifle that was not his, surrounded by bodies. McKinney lowered his weapon. The reinforcements stared at the destruction around him. The ruined machine gun position. The scattered bodies stretching from the jungle to the perimeter. 36 minutes after Sergeant Fukutaro Mori slashed open his tent, Private John McKinney was still standing. Still breathing. Still fully in control of the area. The fight was over, though no one yet understood what had happened. The soldiers who reached McKinney were from 2nd Platoon. They had been fighting on the western side of the perimeter when the attack began. It took them 36 minutes to reach his position. What they found was hard to understand. Bodies were scattered across an area about 100 yards long and 60 yards wide. Japanese soldiers lay slumped over sandbags crumpled in shell craters spread among supply crates and piled near the damaged machine gun emplacement. The platoon sergeant ordered a count. His men moved through the field checking bodies and marking positions. The count lasted 20 minutes. When it ended, the sergeant did not accept the result. He ordered the men to count again. 38 Japanese soldiers were found dead near the machine gun position. 2 more bodies were located near the mortar emplacement 45 yards away. This confirmed 40 kills in an area defended by 1 man for 36 minutes. The sergeant found McKenna sitting on an ammunition crate. The private was holding a blood-soaked bandage against what remained of his right ear. His uniform was ripped and stained. The stock of his rifle was cracked from repeated blows against enemy heads. He appeared exhausted and damaged by the fighting. The sergeant asked him what had taken place. McKenna gave a short report. He mentioned the tent, the sword, the machine gun, and the waves of attackers. He spoke in brief sentences. There was no added detail and no emotion, only facts. The sergeant did not accept the explanation. One soldier killing 40 men in 36 minutes seemed impossible. He believed other defenders must have been involved. Additional riflemen were assumed to have supported McKenna's position. The private appeared disoriented from blood loss and combat stress. However, every other soldier in Company A was accounted for. The 2 men who had originally manned the machine gun with McKinney had withdrawn to the rear with injuries. All others were fighting on different parts of the perimeter. The physical evidence supported McKinney's account. Spent M1 casings covered the ground at the exact spots he described. The wound patterns on the Japanese bodies matched the firing angles from those locations. 1 man was responsible for 40 kills in 36 minutes. Company A's commander sent a report to battalion headquarters. Battalion forwarded it to regiment. Regiment sent it to division. At each level, officers assumed the report was exaggerated. Combat reports often overstated enemy losses. Stress led to errors and confusion. The numbers seemed unlikely. The 33rd Infantry Division sent an intelligence team to confirm the report. They interviewed McKinney and spoke with witnesses. They examined the battlefield and counted the bodies again. Some accounts suggested the number of Japanese dead exceeded 100, but only 40 could be directly linked to McKinney with certainty. The investigators reached a clear conclusion. The report was accurate. Private John McKinney had stopped an attack by roughly 100 Japanese soldiers. He had killed 40 of them. His actions prevented the destruction of his company. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor was submitted in June 1945. The Medal of Honor is the highest military award given by the United States government. Fewer than 3,500 have been awarded since the Civil War. The standards are precise. The recipient must show clear gallantry and courage at great personal risk beyond normal duty. McKinney's actions exceeded those standards by any reasonable measure. The recommendation moved through official review. War Department officials examined the evidence. Their findings matched those of the division investigators. The account was true and supported by witness statements and physical proof. On January 23, 1946, Private John McKinney stood in the White House. Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. The citation described his actions in formal military terms. It referenced extreme gallantry, unmatched resolve, and the act of stopping an assault that threatened his unit. McKenna did not give speeches and did not seek attention. When reporters asked about the battle, he gave the same short answers he had given the sergeant on Luzon. He spoke of the tent, the sword, the machine gun, and the waves of attackers. The press referred to him as the Pacific version of Audie Murphy. Murphy had earned his medal for holding off German forces in France. McKenna achieved a similar result against Japanese troops in the Philippines. Both faced overwhelming odds. Both refused to withdraw. Both succeeded through training resolve and something difficult to explain. After the war, Murphy entered public life, but McKinney returned home to Georgia. He was 25 years old. He carried a Medal of Honor, a limited education, and an ear injury that never fully healed. The war had ended and the fighting was finished. John McKinney now had to learn how to live a normal life again. He returned to Screven County, Georgia in 1946. He went back to the life he knew. He farmed, hunted and fished in the same creeks where he learned to shoot as a boy. He rarely spoke about the war. Neighbors knew he had received the Medal of Honor from newspaper reports, but McKinney never mentioned it. He did not display the medal and avoided reunions and interviews. When asked about Luzon, he would offer a few words and then change the subject. The nightmares were different. His family knew about those. They heard the sounds he made while sleeping. They saw him wake suddenly reaching for a rifle that was not there. The war followed him home in ways that recognition could not fix. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not recognized at the time. In 1946, soldiers struggling with combat memories were told to forget the past and move forward. McKenna did what many veterans of his generation did. He buried the memories and kept working. He married, raised a family, and held various jobs around Screven County. The years moved forward. Korea came and then ended. Vietnam followed and then ended. New conflicts produced new heroes and new veterans with their own hidden memories. McKinney stayed in Georgia, living quietly and growing older without attention. The Medal of Honor rested in a drawer out of sight. He had earned the highest military award in the nation, and most neighbors never knew. In 1965, author Forrest Bryant Johnson began researching McKenna's life. Johnson was also a veteran. He understood what McKinney had lived through. He spent many years locating witnesses, reviewing service records, and rebuilding the details of those 36 minutes on Luzon. The work was difficult. McKinney did not want to speak. Many witnesses had already passed away. Military files were spread across many archives, but Johnson continued. He believed the account needed to be preserved. His book Phantom Warrior was released in 2007. It covered McKinney's childhood in Georgia, his service in the Pacific, and the battle that led to the Medal of Honor. The book brought renewed awareness to a man most Americans had never known. McKinney did not live to see it published. He died on April 5, 1997 in Sylvania, Georgia. He was 76 years old. The son of a sharecropper who had killed 40 Japanese soldiers using a rifle, and his hands passed away quietly with family nearby. He was buried in Screven County, close to the land where he learned to hunt. 20 years after his death, the state honored him again. In 2017, the legislature voted to rename part of a highway in Screven County. It became the John R. McKinney Medal of Honor Highway. A ceremony took place. Veterans were present. The McKinney family accepted the recognition for a man who never looked for praise. The highway sign still stands. Drivers pass it without knowing the meaning of the name. They do not know about the tent and the sword. They do not know about the machine gun and the 36 minutes. They do not know that a quiet farmer once saved an entire company through action and resolve that still challenges belief. 40 men in 36 minutes. One rifle, one soldier, one morning in the Philippines that should have ended in disaster but did not. Private John McKenna never asked to be called a hero. He was a farm boy who joined the army because there was a war. He acted to survive and to protect the men sleeping near him. Then he returned home and tried to live an ordinary life. That is the account. That is the legacy. That is John McKinney. If this story affected you, please support the channel. Select the like button to help share it with others. Subscribe and enable notifications. We recover overlooked stories from old records every day. These are accounts of farm boys and privates who saved lives with rifles and determination. Real people and real service. Leave a comment and say where you are watching from. Our audience reaches across the world. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Let us know you are here. Thank you for watching and for helping ensure John McKenna is not forgotten. These men deserve remembrance and you help make that possible.